Is there a doctor in the house?
Doctor, you have a visitor in the main lobby.
Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about maybe stronger cash flow, smarter automation, maybe contract surprises. I don't know. I'm just a doctor. I count on my patient to bring all the good stuff. So I'm your host, Steve the Doctor Meek, and the doctor is in. Today, my guest is David Awad. Now, you've probably heard of the jukebox hero, but I'm super excited because David's a big tech hero. So welcome, David. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I'm a software engineer by training. I got into the venture capital landscape a little later after that, did my master's in computer science, then got into proper private equity, did law school, came out on the other side. I survived. So I now run an independent practice, sort of a small law firm, plus an M&A advisory firm for investors who are doing technical investments. Anybody buying a software business or something similar to that, just like you'd hire a lawyer to do your normal legal DD, you'd be amazed how many people will invest $2 million and not log into the product they're buying. So that is sort of the gap that we try to fill at Luminance. So that's the very short version of the story. I'm very lucky. I get to do a lot of things and work with some interesting individuals like yourself.
I love it. I think one of the hardest things is to have that multidisciplinary, bring it all together, wrap multiple things together, in one package. Sure, that keeps you pretty busy.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty fun because there's different problems that come up depending on the day. So somebody who might have, let's say there's a ton of small business entrepreneurs that are building software solutions, right? Anything from calendar scheduling to micro AI tools. I don't know if you follow the micro software world, but there's lots of people who will build a small business that's maybe making $4,000 or $5,000 a month, right? But because the margins are so great, you can run that business because maybe it's just a website that hosts content. There's an entire niche of the software ecosystem for just calculator websites. If you've ever looked up like mortgage calculator, that's a website that is insanely profitable and they just run advertising. There's no costs. The business just sits there and produces EBITDA. There's nothing more to it. So there are businesses like that out there that just entirely drive on autopilot. So a lot of things like this, there's just a lot of interesting problems that can come up. I could go on and on, but it's really just a fascinating world because depending on what somebody's doing, maybe they either need a lot more software help or they're just not aware of what they're actually buying and whether they need to do heart surgery on the other side or not.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely think a lesson that every small business can take away of, don't always think so traditional. There's more than one ways to skin that business model cat. So let's go ahead and get into your appointment today. So I like to take care of my patients is ask them about their vitals. And the first vital I have, I just call it pulse. So what's the current state of the market in your opinion, or what industry trend is on your mind? So what's your pulse vital statistic for today?
Let's see. So prepping for this, up until maybe last weekend or a couple days ago, I might have said that the pulse or the trend that I'm looking at is a ton of AI capex. This is the classic thing. This is not new either. There's all kinds of debate, all this money being spent on AI up and down the stack, right? So there's people building the data centers, then people building the core models, then people building the chips that go into the computers, that go into the data centers. Then there's the people building the raw materials that need to go into the chip, or the semiconductors rather. But then there is the end application developers, like I talked about earlier. If somebody's building a small software tool that composes models and uses them for automation, the big questions are how many businesses can be built in this on top of each other in this world, and who is going to capture all of the value? I think a lot of people think it's a winner take all ecosystem. So a couple of interesting things have been happening, up until very recently, which was a bunch of software public market stocks have been crushed. Maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't.
Yes.
Microsoft ditched all of its gains in the last year down to, I think it was down to like $400. And all of these are just based on different perspectives of what does somebody think is going to happen to the future of software. So there's multiple camps. I think some people say, well, the big application software companies like Datadog or DocuSign, whatever, these guys have all of the same AI tools that the small developers do. There's no reason they wouldn't be able to innovate, and the AI tools just scale engineering velocity and everybody gets the same wins. So all of the incumbents will just kind of stay put. That probably is not true, or at least that's not been classically true when it comes to innovating and competing against big tech companies. They're still not that nimble, not that quick. Separately from that, there's the other perspective, which is actually that all these companies get crushed. This probably also isn't true, which is everybody gets crushed. Every individual small business owner sits down and with GPT and they say, hey, I'm going to build this software problem to solve my own really specific thing. I was talking to a transmission shop owner who said, hey, like I have all these OBD readers. They stick them into the car and you use it to take the diagnostics from the engine, right? Maybe the oxygen sensor is out. So we were talking about this problem and we said, okay, can you wire something together that automatically takes the signal as soon as I plug this thing into the car, associates the car to the reader, and then stores the information inside the system to automatically generate the invoice for fixing whatever the problems are on the OBD? Makes sense. It would save the guy a ton of time so that he doesn't have one of his machinists typing in all the codes for the different sensors or what have you that the OBD reader picks up. So then you can automatically generate the invoice, and even better, automatically send it to the customer and write the invoice email and say, hey, here's the problems we found. Here's how much it's going to cost to fix each one, et cetera. That was the idea. Automatic as soon as you plug it. So we were able to get.
I was just going to say, it sounds like your message then is, envision those small things that for an organization, envision those small things that they need to do. Think about the workflow and that AI can help you put it all together.
Exactly. So thank you for reeling me back in. Basically, yeah, there's these two extremes that I described. All the public market SaaS companies have taken a beating, but will probably stick around forever. That's one perspective. Or they all get crushed. Probably neither of those is true. The good news, though, if you're a small business owner, is you don't really need to know or think about the answer to this question. If you're thinking about automation, like you said, all I have to do is just write down what is every workflow that I have that could be automated. And then whether I do it now or whether I do it later, if my cash flows are stable, it doesn't really matter. It matters, of course, but like at the end of the day, there's a lot of different things to prioritize. But at some point, whether now or later, you know that the problem's only going to get easier because the software infrastructure will only improve. So if you're too busy today to worry about this problem, you can go and hire me in 6 months and say, hey, David, I have this obscure workflow automation I want to do. And maybe the way we might have solved it today is probably going to be different in 6 to 12 months. I think that's a safe bet that all of the infrastructure and tools are going to improve. There's this big set of, a big set of blowups about this tool, OpenClaw, that's very popular. And it is a big improvement over ChatGPT in terms of how you use it. But these revolutions are probably going to keep happening at least every 3 to 4 months, if not maybe every 6 to 12. So I think you can sit comfortably, not worrying that you're like missing out on some crazy wave, or that everybody else is completely automating everything in their businesses. That's mostly just nonsense on social media. It takes time, and you have to be careful and build out real workflows that don't break and don't misbehave. That is not some magical thing that everyone else is doing with AI that you're not. The tools break all the time. It's hard to get them to behave. So you don't have to live in fear or live in FOMO or any of that. So that's my takeaway, I'd say.
I think every small business owner is getting pelted all day long, emails, commercials, phone calls, maybe even faxes. I don't know. But all day long, they're getting bombarded with AI messages, missives, companies. What does a small business owner need to do to figure out for themselves, how do I choose? Do I take my main application? Do I focus on my Microsoft stack? Do I focus on this tool that I found, this chat, whatever? What's the decision-making process for selecting your AI choice?
Ooh, it really depends what you do. So, well, if we use my mission shop example, a transmission shop's primarily concerned with something very physical. There's a ton of business process automation there. But like I said earlier, you don't have to necessarily be afraid that you will miss the boat or anything like that. The most important thing for you to do, no matter what marketing you're getting, is just to understand what is the problem you're actually trying to solve. because there's a lot of the lazy way to talk about this that all these ads are doing are saying they'll show you some screen with 8 monitors and say, I've automated all of this stuff. I'm running my agency with 10,000 different agents or whatever. It's really actually bizarre. I've never seen a level of insanity like this for other technological revolutions. Not even with blockchain, where they had the direct incentive because they were all shilling the fake cryptos. But here, when you just think about what am I doing? Like, what is the actual work that I do every day? Before, you might have just kind of implicitly said, I have my job every day. I'm working in the business, not on the business most of the time with clients I'm talking to. That's what they'll tell me. So the easiest thing you can do to start is just write down what is everything that happens from intake to deliverable for whoever your client is, right? Like, as an attorney, that fluctuates for me a little bit, but there are workflows that I've defined. For example, every time I get a new client, right? I have a bot that I say, hey, this is Steve. He's a new client. Here's his information. Here's his email. Go look through my emails, take all those notes, write a summary, and then go create a new folder for him. Go create our billing spreadsheet for him. Then go and put together an evidence folder and collect any documents he's given us and categorize them and do all that. Well, that is a decent, like, 15 minutes of work. And so everyone has these in their business that they can start documenting to think through the problems. That's what I would say.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think hearing news about AI projects that are failing, things that aren't working, and I hear you really saying doing a project that isn't needed is going to fail. So you need to think, you need to be intentional and try to figure out which of these, what am I trying to solve? What's costing me money? Is it time, errors, missed follow up, slow billing, poor forecasting, whatever it happens to be. It's bad decisions. All of those things can be thing is that your AI can solve, but you have to know what you're trying to solve, and I like your approach there.
Yeah, there's two things. One, you have to have eye to use AI, right? You have to actually you have to actually know what it is you're trying to achieve. Like, if I ask you when it comes to producing this podcast, you might be able to tell me, oh, I do all this post production. Maybe we do editing. Maybe we turn it into shorts, and that's all great. But you can have artificial intelligence. You cannot have artificial wisdom. So you will notice all the time, anyone who's used ChatGPT will probably tell you that it does not have good judgment about what should and shouldn't happen. If I give an AI model a video and just say, edit this into shorts, it's just not going to do a good job. It takes a long time to hone the text files you're using, the prompts, the personality that you want the AI to think about, for lack of a better term. They're not thinking real intelligence. It is a token generator. But when you talk about the idea of judgment, what you really, really want, what most people seem to really, really want, is to say, you should avoid these obvious things. If there's like something that feels obvious to me when I tell an AI to do something, that is what I'm trying to achieve. Takes a long time to figure out. Just in my experience, when I've set up these bots and automations for clients, they'll say, oh, like, that's good that we got this working. And now that we're using it, I realize, like, it's actually dumb for these reasons. Like, we should make these changes. And it just comes up with experimentation, which is why, like, writing it all out for yourself, just saying, what is every step that happened? For me, that is what gets the wheels turning, so you can figure out how to actually get after it. Because there's not one magic solution. And if you try to just deploy a model and you haven't gone through the process of, like, tuning it, it takes some time to, like, have someone sit there and figure out what you're really trying to achieve and embedding that into the knowledge of the model. But the models don't, like, magically learn on their own or some other such nonsense. Like, what's happening is sometimes people will get creative. I think you need a little bit of software engineering background to do this to an extent. Well,
Yeah, I think too that sometimes we judge AI way more harshly than we judge ourselves. If you're 40 years
yes.
old, been in your job 20 years, you can't just throw one prompt into AI and think it's going to know everything that you know. It's going to take some time to distill down all the knowledge, the wisdom, the guidance. What you do naturally, by being an expert in your role, it takes a while to impart that into it. And I've been working with, some different AI stuff, and Copilot for me, when I first started working with it, it was a complete idiot. But, flash forward a couple of years, it keeps learning from me, keeps learning from me. And before, it would have to ask me a whole bunch of questions. Now it makes a whole bunch of assumptions because of everything that it's learned about me over the years. And, I kind of feel like AI is my drinking buddy now because every so often they'll say things like, "Hey, Steve, because you're like this." I'm like, "Oh, that's so perceptive about me." I appreciate that and
Mm,
realize I'm talking to my computer just because of,
yeah.
a prompt it fed me back. Just it takes time to learn and program it, to your point.
The cool thing is, it doesn't also have to be owned by Microsoft either. Like I'd imagine maybe listeners of this show and in general, some other small business owners I've talked to, they come away with these kind of interesting fears that make a lot of sense, which is, oh, like I've given all this data already to ChatGPT and GPT, quote, understands me or has learned about me and we've had enough interactions where it retains certain information. It's possible to create the same memory and retrieval systems on stuff you deploy for yourself too. So, for example, if I'm deploying a Claude bot for a law firm, we kind of went back and forth with this. You set up custom workflows that lawyers might want, maybe access to legal data, briefs, filings, motion calendars, etc. That's all great. But then if you want these custom, more nuanced features, you can deploy and build them yourself. It's actually not that hard. You basically have with these OpenClaw is not the only way to do this. It's just the most popular right now. You have a chat bot. You can message it on your phone, on WhatsApp, whatever, and you can provision it on a system that lives inside of your office. And you can tell it, hey, you've got maybe 45 gigs, let's say 1 terabyte of hard drive. Just take a section of that and use it for memory. And as we talk to each other every day, meaning as I message the bot and give it commands and tell it about myself, it remembers what things it did in the past. And by remembers, what I mean is it takes normal language, English sentences, and turns them into vectors, meaning mathematical representations of the sentences. And then it collects all the mathematical representations and it stores them on the hard drive. So that way, when you ask certain sentences, it takes the sentence you created and calculates the similarity between the previous sentences. So then it can say it has memories, it remembers that David is a software engineer, a lawyer, etc. But it remembers that because it has the ability to mathematically calculate that when it processes new questions that I give it. So those algorithms for creating the memory architecture, they're called embeddings. But the idea is simple. They're memory setups. You can create your own memory embeddings and you can customize them. There's all kinds of free and open source software to do this too. So if I was a business owner and I didn't understand anything that David just said, I might take peace in the fact that that the Microsoft and the proprietary models, OpenAI, Anthropic, that's going to continue to be there and get better. And the open source ones that people make and make freely available, those models will also continue to exist and keep getting better. And so at any point, you can stop and say, I don't want to use OpenAI anymore. Or maybe I'm worried about patient data. Maybe I'm doing healthcare billing for a small dental office or something. And I've gone through this with a different client as well, where we just need to bill insurance, but we have HIPAA requirements. So this information has to stay encrypted and it can't leave this out. That's totally possible, depending on how simple your workflows are. So you don't need to have it all figured out today, and you can take peace that if you drag your feet a little bit, the models will get better, and you don't even have to use the really intelligent closed source ones that are super expensive. At some point down the road, you can always just buy a good enough machine for $3,000 to $5,000, hook that up in the office, and just run your compute off of that. It's kind of funny, right? In the 90s, this was how it was done, right? You got your own rack,
Yeah.
you got your own computer server, you set that up in the back, and you had that little cabinet next to the PBX that no one uses anymore for your in-office phone. But that in-office deployment is making a comeback because of those requirements and people who just don't want to pay the insane OpEx that comes with fully AI employees that have their own problems. And a lot of people I'm seeing who are just blowing through token budgets, trying to figure out how to get these things to be effective.
Are you also seeing, I guess anytime I hear open source, and it may not be specifically for the vendors that you'd mentioned, but typically there's in my mind, I feel like sometimes there's a higher kind of security risk profile depending on the tools, depending on the skills marketplace. Sometimes the security settings aren't there. It almost feels like there's always going to be trade-offs back and forth, and finding what's right for you is important. How do you advise, organizations, businesses, users? How do you help them understand the guardrails they need to have in place, the settings, the handling credentials and permissions, all of those kinds of things.
Easiest way is to just use an analog to a bad employee, right? Let's just have a bad employee. Let's say his name is David. Just we'll use me so we don't hurt any of the listeners' feelings.
Oh, I thought you heard something
So
about my business partner.
no, just me. So let's
He's
say
also a
Dave.
David. Okay, Dave.
Nice. Let's say Dave. Then we'll keep both of us out of it. So Dave is a bad employee, and now Dave can be the analog for what does the AI have access to? What can they break? So for myself, I have an assistant, and we've set up a bunch of convenient tools. My assistant has read-only access to a bunch of stuff, and she's got write access to fewer things, right? And we share stuff on a one-to-one basis. So maybe if I have a health insurance billing person, maybe I just give them exports from my health record software once per month of all the patients we saw that month. So the worst case surface area of the biller, Dave being a bad employee, is maybe he blows up that one file and we have to go figure out how far did he get in that file before the bills stopped getting sent correctly. Stuff like that. And you can pick high and low risk workflows too. But in general, the perfect analog is just what is absolutely not acceptable for us to experiment with right now, and what stuff is acceptable for us to experiment with right now. And then you gradually work your way up as you get better at using the tools. That's the most straightforward way. Like you don't have to give. I think there's a lot of media out there that is creating a lot of hysteria on security vulnerabilities for these AI tools, which is valid. It's just it's missing the point a little bit. Like it's very possible to set up these tools and use them securely. Similarly to many other instances, we run code in production all over the world that has access to sensitive secrets, encryption keys, what have you. And this works, right? Like we have these problems have been solved. You store them in secure environments, and then you only use them sparingly to make sure that those keys, for lack of a better word, the keys are stored in the right places, and you only use the keys when you absolutely need them, and then every other time they're stored in an encrypted place, cold storage, what have you. And if someone's setting up a Claude bot for you, whether that's me or somebody else, if they're doing a good job, they've set up the correct safe places for those things to live. And if you have something just running in your office, and it's not actually using the web, you're not using OpenAI, you're using a local model, there's nothing it's in contact with, right? Like you generally speaking are safe. So you can start to see how, depending on what you're trying to achieve, there's the most secure, which is a fully offline model, a computer that's air gapped. It's just not on the internet, where you just have it plugged in. You're having certain kinds of jobs that you give it. That's totally possible. And that there's other kinds of use cases where you say, hey, like we need this to be able to access the web, but we're going to be very careful about it can only access this folder of spreadsheets. And right now, that's all we're doing. It's only in this folder of spreadsheets that it has access to. Outside of that, it has no permissions anywhere else in the org. That's also totally possible, right? So you can choose to create, when you give these things keys, you can put lots of careful guards on those keys so that you can just decide, like, as you get better at using them and get more comfortable, and whoever you're having to work on maintaining these things for you, just carefully creates new workflows with the right permissions, and ideally, just back to security basics, as few permissions as possible, principle of least access, right? As few resources should be used as possible in order to preserve the integrity of other data on the system that could be accessed or affected, as long as you do a good job of provisioning these credentials. And the good news is, after a while, once you've done it a little bit, it gets pretty easy. And the tools by the cloud providers are quite good if that's what you're using for things like IAM and permission management. It sounds scarier than it is, but I think the cybersecurity fears are overblown.
Yeah, I guess what I heard you saying was, first and foremost, figure out what data system needs access to. That's number one. You're solving a problem,
Right.
but it's going to need access to some data to do that. So figure out what data it needs access to. Make sure the permissions are in place. Start small. Grow. You'll get better at it, and then also consider, what's the worst case if that access gets abused. I think putting all of those together, your concept of keys, all of that. Am I air gapping it? Do multiple people have access? Does one person have access? That's probably the right approach for making sure that you can feel safe about things.
Yes. Oh, one other thing. So if you and I were to look back at the self-driving car context, the regulatory environment feels a lot more straightforward. Congress actually preemptively prevented states from banning self-driving cars. Now that innovation has taken a good long while to really come to fruition. It's still not fully here yet. On the other side of the fence, if we look at the large language models and their adoption in the business environment, depending on what you do for work, what industry you're in, there are certain use cases of AI that are and are not allowed. So this has not been regulated by the federal government in the same way. So different states are regulating different industries' usage of LLM in different ways. For example, one state law where might say, oh, in this particular state, children or children under the age of like 8 are not allowed to talk to LLMs just flat. For example, there's actually a horrendous bill in New York State that recently was introduced into the legislature banning model providers from the use and enablement of LLMs for any of the following purposes: legal advice, medical advice, therapy, etc. Essentially taking a whole bunch of so-called professionals and gating them from being, I guess, innovated against by the model providers. And it opens up a private right of action for people to be able to sue the model providers themselves for enabling that access in any way, which is horrendous, like I said. But the point is, in different states, there are different regs to be aware of. And full disclosure, I mean, I'm an attorney, right? Like I get paid to help people navigate this stuff. I think it's worth, at the very least, a Google search. Double check your state. There's not that many laws on the books on this area, but there are things that are coming out that you want to be aware of. Another random example, right? California putting out a regulation specifically requiring age verification on any operating system in the state, which is also horrendous. But those kinds of things, it's worth at least just chatting with a technically savvy attorney just to make sure you understand, I guess, what you're getting into. If you're trying to use AI, maybe in a small dental practice, that's going to be different than maybe manufacturing or a mining facility.
Yeah, Texas has Trega Act. Actually, the sponsor of the bill was out of my district. For some reason, I thought that the Fed had come back and was trying to prohibit states from enacting their own AI guidance and laws and stuff. But let's go ahead and move on to the heart rate. So to me, heart rate is like the performance metrics that tell the story for you right now. What's in your world? What do you think that performance metric is?
I guess it depends who we're. The classic answer in PE and VC is probably going to be a combination of just basic, what are the returns, number of deals getting done in private markets. That's certainly true. I'd love to also point to how many of those deals specifically are technology companies that are being purchased or sold. Last time I checked, it's something like somewhere between 20 and 30% of private market transactions are companies that identify as technology companies, either software, deep tech, hardware, etc. So that number of technology companies, I suspect, will increase with time. Because I think what happens is as AI proliferates, software engineering becomes cheaper, which if software engineering becomes cheaper, labor productivity goes up because it's easier for people to create more automations. Naturally, more automations will follow. As a result of that, probably more and more technology transactions happening. It's not exactly clear. There's so many different possible businesses getting built, right? So it's not obvious to me exactly which way this goes, but one thing that certainly will occur is it will become easier and cheaper to create software. And as that happens, the number of different kind of custom solutions for different kinds of obscure problems will go up. So that's probably the thing I'm most interested in. Like the amount of software, just the plain amount of software that exists and is used will simply continue to increase. I suppose another good, sorry to cut you off, I'll give you one more, which is what is the number of agents that exists in the civilization will also continue to increase. I think we get to a point where any small business owner, or you and I, each of us will have 40 of these things.
If I'm trying to think this through as a business owner, I'm thinking, based on what you just said, transactions are technology heavy, regardless of what your business is. think about what is the technology of your business, and is there an opportunity, with all the no code, low code options out there. Software development probably isn't, one of your core skills, but with AI, you don't need that skill. For any small business, you can consider, hey, is there some sort of software, application, tool, repository, whatever, something that I have insight into where maybe I evolve into a technology company. Maybe my whole job is sanitation. Maybe I can create a program to better manage teams or whatever. There's a potential play for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, there essentially is. I mean, there's probably caveats that are safe, at least for a good long while, but it all depends on you. So, for example, I own and operate an Airbnb, let's say. And so we have guests booked for all of March. And maybe I know that like my ordinary cleaner, like their typical contract is they're going to clean all of the normal surfaces, they're going to dust, they're going to sweep, mop, etc. But they will not go out and like clean out my attic every couple of months. So maybe they're not going to go through my gutters, right? If and we don't know exactly when these kinds of things will happen. It's all speculative. But there is similar innovation happening in the field of robotics. It's just not proliferated nearly as much. If you would like to try to see into the future, take a look at the Optimus robots and see what those are capable of, because there are already people who have these like test and prototype units that are doing things like folding clothes and washing dishes. There's certainly going to be some overpriced first versions of this, but thinking a little bit more, not just about, like we talked about earlier, documenting all of the work that gets done, ba- bracketing that into what is digital work and what is physical work, understanding those two things, and then kind of making a hierarchy of, okay, which ones can we attack? Because like you said, you don't need to be a software engineer to build maybe some automation that might work for a small piece of your business. I would say you should check with the software engineer at the very least to ensure you don't do something that is insecure from a security standpoint. It's not that I think the models are going to drive you off the cliff, but they don't understand anything greater than the immediate thing in front of them. So if you've put the password to your bank account in there for part of an automation to do your invoicing or something, well, you won't know if you've set that up in a way that's not exactly the safest. Maybe you've set it up on a server somewhere, and that server is taking public traffic from the internet. Maybe not advisable, right? But it really depends on what you're doing. So you can build some of the stuff, but you got to sanity check from someone and start like bracketing out and thinking in this regimented way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true of everything. Post COVID, I think we kind of became consumer technology driven world for a minute there. And so it's easy to believe that anybody can build anything as an expert in those kinds of things. But every day I have a conversation with someone about something. Whether it's hey, just because you have a Chat GPT license doesn't mean that the privacy and security settings are appropriate for you, or just because you've organized this file structure doesn't mean that you've applied permissions, so it's disallowed in this other area, or whatever. Then, fortunately, the great side of the revolution is that it allows us to create easier and quicker. The downside of the revolution is if you're not an expert, you don't know what you don't know, and
That's
you
the
really,
part.
you really do need, like you've got a CPA, an attorney, whatever. There are other people that can supplement, kind of whatever your solution is that you're trying to build.
You don't know what you don't know is probably the perfect encapsulation of this, because there's so many different ways that something can break that you cannot anticipate going into a particular thing. I'll never forget my favorite example. It may be a little obscure for the listeners, but when you write software, you write your code, and then very often you write tests. The idea being that, let's say 70% of the tests have to pass. And you write that in the code. You say 70% must pass before we approve this deployment, right? I'll never forget one time I had a model I was fighting with, and I told the model, write this code and make sure you meet the threshold, 70%. And the model spun its wheels on this for like 15 minutes. I come back, I say, hey, what gives, Dave? Right. And The model says, you're right. I've spent too long on this. And then it comes back and it tells me that the tests are passing. So I'm like, great. I go to look at the code and the output, it says it's verified and as far as the UI. And then I go look and the model, it's verified because the model lowered the threshold from 70 to 30. Right. And it's like, well, that's not really
Yeah.
that's not the goal here. That's not what we do, Dave. But that's the kind of thing where like it's just these, it will mess up in ways you do not expect. If anything, you almost want it to think less by putting so many guardrails that the only way that it can go right, or that the only way that it can think it was successful is for it to have done the thing that you wanted it to.
Right.
And that's what takes a lot of tuning. Like I spend a lot of time with client work, engineering tricks and software tools and like infrastructure to make sure that it can't break other stuff. And it can't mess up stuff that was working before because it's constantly writing new code and overwriting the old. So you can always break things that used to work and cause all kinds of problems. There's a lot of QA that is a nightmare that goes into that. So that's a very important thing. So I think it's going to get better. But just like what you do now, where like if you're going to talk to a lawyer, you're not going to pay, maybe you don't need to pay $500 for a first meeting where if you get a free consultation, you'll sit with GPT first with your issue and say, okay, here's my problem. Tell me how this works. You know, how does copyright work? Like I want to copyright this book I published. Before I go talk to David about filing with the copyright office, I want to understand, what is this? How does it work? What does it protect? I can get all that stuff. I can get all those answers. Then I go to my initial consultation with David and I have a much more productive conversation. And now I can save a lot of time and get into issues that might have required a second consultation that I would have paid for, that now can be handled the first time. So I can save a lot of money just by having those tools available. That's the kind of stuff where just like you would do that for an attorney, do the same thing for the software, you know? Like depending on what you're building, you can write that rough draft and bring it to that software engineer and see if they can take it to a completed state for you. But that's really going to just depend on you, the business owner, how much time you have, how much you're willing to invest, and how much it actually is suitable for the business. You know, we can't automate property managers anytime soon. That's for sure. But you know, like certain work has to happen before certain work has to happen and has to stay done by regular people because it takes a good while to get it right.
Well, and I think I think your point, really leans into. I heard. I was at a meeting where I got to hear from the great John Maxwell, and one of the things that he said kind of really mirrors or echoes what you're saying there. I love his quote. He said that AI is an incredible thing, but what's going to happen? Smart people are going to get smarter, and stupid people are going to get stupider. And my takeaway being that exactly what you described. Hey, you want to build a better mousetrap? Go do your research, then take that to whoever your expert is, and then kind of
Yeah.
talk it through. It'll be cheaper. They'll be able to scope better. They'll be able to build it better. But that depends on you being able to do that. If you're just taking whatever AI gives you, sometimes it's going to give you that, it's going to hit your 70% threshold. Sometimes it's going to lie to you and say 30 is good enough. But you don't know that if you're just trusting everything it says. It's like trusting the Roomba. It's not always going to be exactly right.
That's a good one. I have not heard that one before. I will hold on to that. That's good. The really cool part is actually the explosion in opportunity. So if I'm sitting here, like I said earlier, if you're a business owner, you don't have to be in fear that this is all going to change behind your back and you're going to miss out and you're going to get burned. It's not going to be that fast. It is going to change and it's going to feel fast in the sense that the progress rate is high because there's so much happening. But what's really happening is there's an explosion in the number of different tools, solutions, and opportunities out there for everyone. So, like you said, if now I can go and prototype my thing, get it built by an AI model first before I go and take it to an expert, well, I can do the same thing with designing some physical product. I can go buy the 3D printer for maybe $300 to $500, sit with the models, design something. The speed from which something can emerge from my mind into a digital representation that's workable,
Yes.
that is what's going to really feel like magic, right? So whatever the context is, I think everybody at this point no matter what you're doing for your business, you should feel comfortable at least playing around with running some bits of software, creating software yourself, running them, and then simultaneously, everyone should understand how to generate a 3D model and print it. Because now you have the physical and the digital worlds and the ability to manipulate both in front of you. You don't have to understand it perfectly, but take a look at the basic software tools that are out there. Try Blender, try some of the AI tools that let you generate 3D models, try printing them, and then try writing code. If you have those two things, well, now there's only a couple of little pieces of blue before you can start maybe designing your own small devices and things like that. And that's where things get really exciting for everyone. It's not even just about me as someone who wants to see more patents and inventions get built, but the number of ideas and things that will emerge, like all kinds of brilliant ideas will simply continue to emerge as the barrier to entry from creating them just continues to decrease. That's the exciting part. And it's not going to be instant. But I think for anyone, depending on what you're doing, like I'm sure everybody has that like one idea where they thought, oh man, I wish I could have built that thing. But now you
Tricorder.
kind of inept and
I was going to build a tricorder or maybe a phaser. I think I'll go with a phaser.
I have a million ridiculous ideas that I've always wanted to build. And some of them, like physical, I still have to learn how to design PCBs. Similar situation. Like, I don't know how to do proper, like, I don't know how to design and print a circuit board at any design I can come up with or what have you. But I could certainly do it a lot faster now. And the nice thing is, like I said earlier, if you just sit on the sidelines and say, I know this is going to get easier, so I'll come back to it later, that's basically fine, especially if it's not your core competency or it's not what you're doing for your business. So you can just kind of enjoy the ride as long as cash flows are stable and you're able to manage your own affairs. There's no reason you can't just wait to see how it goes.
I agree. Get started, try something small. AI is a potentially completely different skill than anything most of us have ever done before. So the only way to understand the opportunity, understand the impact is for you to start somewhere, do something, just kind of be safe about it. So the last statistic I had, just to kind of get a measure of how things are in your world, is weight. And so for me, weight is kind of that strategy. What should leaders know about that we haven't talked about yet?
I suppose weight in this context perhaps would be evaluated as, since we're sticking with the AI path here, but
Mhm.
I'll use software more broadly. My belief is that similar to the automobile, when the automobile was developed, the cost of transportation went down and the demand for transportation on the other side of that went through the roof and GDP along with it, right? The increase in the availability of transportation was one of the great innovations in human history, right? And with the increased GDP productivity, decreased cost of transportation came
Mhm.
a wide variety of new industries, right? And similarly here, there are entire sub industries that have never been created or not been created yet because it was cost prohibitive. We just don't know what those use cases are yet. The same is true here. So the weight metric I might use is what is the amount of, like I said earlier, I think it's probably going to have to apply for both. I'll cheat a little bit. The amount of software in use in the world probably is still the most interesting question. What is the amount of software and how much is that number changing? Presumably, it will simply go up and it will be as simple as that. That might not be the case, right? It might just be that certain kinds of software, I think we're a few breakthroughs away from these kinds of things, but certain kinds of software just are continuously reused, like LLMs. You use the same code and you ask it different questions every day, but it's the same code executing on your one machine if you deploy it that way, right? So at least I think that what happens is the amount of code in use in the world simply continues to increase. And how that goes on to ripple through the economy will just be hopefully an explosion of new kinds of businesses. And that will be the thing to look at for the future. What leaders should know about this is it's not going to slow down, and it's not going to slow down for multiple reasons. The first reason is even if you tried to regulate it, right? Like similar to what happened with crypto way back in the 2010s. Crypto was deeply regulated. The CFTC and the SEC created a lot of regulatory ambiguity. They would just go after certain businesses. They called it regulation by prosecution. right? You would just wake up with a Wells notice and find out you're being charged for or fined $110 million by the SEC or whatever. So that was a tough time. And what ended up happening was all of these crypto businesses just left. They just left the States, right? What's clear, at least in this administration, is that this is a generational opportunity, that they view it as a generational opportunity. And so they're going to go after it, right? They're going to try to create as much innovation as they can and domesticate that innovation here in the States. Even further, the belief of trying to regulate in the future. If you thought, for example, maybe I can ignore this or set this aside because I think future administrations might be hostile, you have to be aware of the open source thing. There are literally companies that will spend $200 million on a model development. GLM, DeepSeek, Quen. Some of these are Chinese companies, just for awareness. But you can download these models for free. You can run them anywhere. I have a fun thing I like to tell. I was talking to some New Hampshire state legislators not too long ago, and I basically was like, listen, guys, you don't have to do anything. Like, regulating intelligence is dumb, right? What you want is, in fact, a wide proliferation of intelligence. And specifically here, anybody will be able to download one of these models if they want to and just run it on their computer at home. That's already the case today. It's just the models aren't that impressive. But the progress is staggering, right? In 2023, the best model in the world was GPT-3. But now I can run on my MacBook GPT OSS 120B, which is an open source version that OpenAI put out like last year, something like that. Wonderful model. Works great on my local MacBook. I don't need to pay anyone. It runs entirely here. No one can know, right? Like, it's impossible to know what's happening inside of my own computer. Depending on what conspiracy theories you ascribe to, you can switch your MacBook for maybe a framework laptop and run Linux. Totally safe, right? More importantly, back to the point. These models you cannot regulate them out of existence. Even the New York state legislatures and what have you, you cannot actually prevent the access to compute. And if you look at the great trends happening across the world today in the digital side of things, you have the proliferation of the Internet of Money in the form of crypto and Web3, and an increasing number of ways that software and money can interact with the world via prediction markets, digital exchanges, tokenized stocks, etc. And then on the other side, you have the wide availability of intelligence, which is, like we've described, open source models, open source software, and the continued composition of these tools to build on top of each other, which they will continue to do. Then you have finally the availability of encryption and that tying together the ability to have full privacy in your interactions with software and technology. These three things together will be a very strong foundation for probably, whether now or later, probably how people interact with the digital world. So all you have to do is be aware that the most important skill for you is to learn how to orchestrate a combination of people and agents to achieve greater and greater objectives. Your ability to manage and delegate and break down tasks into subtasks, routines, and workflows, some of which can be automated to varying degrees, that will determine just how much leverage and impact you can have.
The modern knowledge worker is going to be someone more, a person who can manage agents as opposed to, kind of his own self and his own work.
Exactly.
Well, David, we're here in Texas, so I got to say we've covered enough ground today to wear out a good pair of boots. Now before I let you out of this appointment, before we release everyone else back to their day, I kind of wanted to wrap up and try to find a little bit. I guess one of the things I like to do is try and let me get the big. If there was one big takeaway that you want every small business leader, government leader, whatever, listening to take away from our conversation today, what would you say that is?
Increasing availability of tools to create anything is a good thing, right? Like, these tools are free, they are freely distributed, they are free to copy, free to create with, independently in a way that cannot be prevented, right? Because they are distributed, available on your own computer. I could download any model, any file. This is all protected First Amendment speech. That should be seen as a good thing. If I am someone that loves art, if I truly love art, then the wide availability of software tools to create art is a good thing. The wide availability of software tools to create new software is a good thing. The wide availability of the tools for creating is what is extremely important. So that is the thing that I think is the most optimistic and interesting trend that may shift the trajectory of certainly the near future and almost definitely the long term.
Yeah, I agree. It's an incredible time if you're passionate about something, to see what you're envisioning brought to life, to see what you're thinking about spelled out.
Yeah.
We're talking about automating processes, which is probably boring to the average person, but I think there's even elegance in that. Not just
Right.
accomplishing something, but so quickly, so well, so whatever. It's everyone can feel like an architect at whatever it is that they do.
Right.
But now, along with that major takeaway, are there any? I call them prescriptions, but are there anything other things that people can do? Books they can read? Any feedback you have? Things that giveaways that you've got?
This will be highly dependent on the date that this show is released, which is crazy to say, but that really is the case when it comes to this area. I think the biggest thing in terms of resources, I think the best thing you could do is just sit down and try these tools one way or another. I think you have to, certainly if you're tech savvy in any way, I think the best thing you could do is sit down, wire up one of these machines, whether that's OpenClaw or something else, and just see what the limitations are. Separate the noise from the signal and understand like what they can do and what they can't. Get familiar with it. That'll be really helpful for you one way or another. Setting that aside, like we said earlier, the next best thing you should do, take a look at the foundational books in the area. I think everyone should know a little bit of statistics and a little bit of probability, a little bit of basic math, be able to understand how stats, math, and a little bit of calculus is used in these models. Understand that these models are token generators. You can read the original papers put out from Google on the transformer models in the first place. The transformer model was the breakthrough back in 2017 that led to the large language model that OpenAI then turned into the instruct model, a fancy term, for the thing that you're used to, which is very nice to you and answers your questions. Right. So, like, there is a clear path you can sort of follow. If you take a look at those papers, the 2017 Transformer paper and blanking on the dates for the Instruct GPT paper, but that was what it was called. So those two papers might be really nice to take a look at. There's no books because there's no best practices. We had best practices a year and a half ago that were completely thrown out, right? So it's just going to keep happening again and again like that, unfortunately. So I'd say that's my advice is you just got to go and try this stuff. And don't be too scared. Don't feel the FOMO. A lot of the stuff being advertised online, thousands of people working on something, what have you. It's mostly vapor. There's very few people who are doing really, really interesting things. They're out there, though. I'd love to say that I was one of them, but I don't think I'm that interesting yet. But there is this stuff out there. And if you want the help, by all means, send me a message or send a text. I'm happy to answer and help people out with what they're trying to build because there's always opportunity out there, even if you're not hiring me. So.
While we're on the topic, if someone wanted to reach out and get a hold of you directly, after this podcast, how would they get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter at RealDavidAwad. You can also find me. My small law firm is called Awad.lawyer. You can find us on there. And if you're interested in the technical M&A advisory and technical due diligence, by all means, take a look at Luminance.capital. That's Luminance.capital. You'll find us Luminance Capital Partners.
And I'll make sure and include that the URL for that in the show notes. I think I've got a copy of that somewhere. I didn't know there was a Doc
Tremendous.
Capital.
That's actually one of my favorite pieces of advice when I meet when I meet business owners. I'll just go look up their business and say, "Oh, I notice you are you're a bike rental company." So then I went and looked up like their business name .bike. It's available for $12. It's like, yeah, these new vanity domains are big and they're really fun and they make a nice positive impression. So I recommend them to everyone. They're easy to get and they're not. It's a lot of fun. So I love the vanity domains. I tell people about them all the time, like Awad.lawyer, right? Like that's super fun. to have, and it sticks out in the minds of some clients. They love that. So
Definitely. And for myself, you can always reach me via email, the doctor, all spelled out, doctor at fulcrumgroup.net, on LinkedIn. But hey, if you reach out on LinkedIn, a lot of people reach out that I don't know. And being a cybersecurity guy, I don't link up with everyone unless I've met you face to face or we've done business or had some sort of conversation. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed it today. That brings us to the end of our doctor's appointment. And I think if today's conversation with David did anything, my hope is that it reminded you that we're not all out there just chasing growth. We're doing other things with our business. We're trying to protect cash flow. Get better at decision making, and sometimes that could be building systems. That kind of hold up. Even in these uncertain times where I don't know that we're always sure what's going to happen next, but we know something's going to happen. So make sure that that you keep that in mind as you consider what you're doing. But anyways, David,
yeah,
thanks for being here. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek. If you liked what you heard, subscribe, suggest a topic, but hang around. We've always got more coming on. Thanks for today, and the doctor is out. Thank you.